That's a good one. Oh, hi! You caught me back at the crime scene using my alternate light source and looking at one of our pieces of evidence for the presence of latent prints. And indeed, I found some really good latent prints on this glass. So the next step is to do some black powder, right? Yes and no. Typically, the black powder that you see on TV, in this very fine black powder with one of these little delicate brushes, can be done at the crime scene on non-porous items. However, items such as this glass, which can be transported to the lab in a more controlled environment, are typically collected and then processed at the laboratory. Now, that's not to say that you can't do some powdering at the crime scene, especially on pieces of items that cannot be collected or may be in danger of losing evidence if they're being transported, say a vehicle, for instance. Okay, so to get our best evidence, let's take this back to the lab and powder it there. Hi, welcome back to our laboratory space. The last technique that I want to talk to you about for the collection of a particular type of latent evidence is fingerprint powdering. Now, as I discussed at the crime scene, this type of evidence here would typically be collected from the crime scene and then taken back to the lab for processing. Fingerprint powdering can be done at the crime scene, but typically it's only done if the item can't be moved. Something like a large table that we had in our crime scene. Another example might be an Arcadia door, a large glass window. So those are the types of items that you would expect to see powdered at a crime scene. And other items will be collected and then taken back to the crime lab. Now, I also mentioned that if something was in danger of perhaps losing that piece of evidence, maybe a vehicle, if it has to get transported back to the crime lab to be processed there, fingerprint powdering and some collection can be done on site as well as at the crime lab. Now, there are a lot of different methods of latent print development, but I'm going to be demoing the powdering method for you today, and we'll talk about a few more after this. Now, just as with the other products I've used, you see some brands here. This is not an endorsement. These just happen to be the particular brands that we're using in the laboratory. And black powder, I better not spill this because I will warn you, this is messy. This is a very fine powder, and if you get it on your face, it's really hard to get off. It's not dangerous, it's just kind of a nuisance. So I'm going to be very careful. And a little goes a long way. So when you powder, you're going to use this very fine brush, and you don't have to paint it on. You don't have to slap it on like you would paint. It's very gentle. So if you think about applying powder to the face, or maybe gently petting a dog's head or a cat, you're going to be that gentle with the brush, with the powder on it, on the piece of evidence. So I'm going to dip the powder a little bit, and you can see with just that small dip how much powder I actually got. So I'm going to make sure that I get some of this powder off because I don't need that much. Then I am just going to gently swirl the powder across the glass. And in the crime scene, we saw, or at least I saw, some good latent prints for collection. Now, as I was saying, a little goes a long way. And if I need to apply more powder, I can. And I might do that just a little bit. This small area here, just so you all can see this at home. and perhaps we can see it here, these nice two prints that can then be tape lifted and placed onto a fingerprint card for later comparison. Now I'm going to put the lid on my powder because I do not want to accidentally spill this. And I am going to use a hinge lifter or a tape lifter to attempt to lift these prints off the surface of the glass. Now these are a particular type of tape that can be used to lift latent prints. However, in my iCure, you can use good packaging tape. So this is, I've taken the sticky side in front of my face. Now the sticky side will now be applied to the glass gently, and you just want to use some caution with it because you don't want to lift it, replace it, lift it, replace it. And even this probably wasn't the greatest job, but we'll see. Smooth it down to make sure that you've collected all of that detail that hopefully you will be able to see on the card, and then you will lift it and then place the tape onto the fingerprint card, and then this portion can then be discarded. So I didn't do a great job. That's okay. It's trial and error. This is why packaging tape can be a good alternative to the more expensive hinge lifters, because obviously it's a lot cheaper. But you can see here I did lift at least some pretty good ridge detail in black powder from those two developed prints that we saw on the wine glass. So then these can be analyzed and compared if there is any other known fingerprint comparison to be used. Here are some other examples of lifted prints, either through my previous teaching or others' teaching, and you can see they vary in quality. That's going to happen. That is typical. And it's typical because of experience, but it's also typical because when you're powdering a latent print, you really don't know how much ridge detail is actually left. So what you're seeing here are actually amazing examples of lifted latent prints. And you might think, oh, these are kind of crummy. Well, you should wait until you see a crime scene latent print. You're not necessarily going to get this good of quality detail. Okay, so I've talked about powdering, and I've mentioned black powder. If you have a different type of surface, say a dark surface, there is also fluorescent powders that can be purchased, as well as white powders and gray powders. So you're not limited to just black powder. It's again going to depend upon your surface. Let's say that powdering or fingerprint powdering isn't really something that you want to use as a standalone. There is also something you've probably heard of called super glue fuming, and actually the more appropriate term is cyanoacrylate fuming. And yes, the reason why it's cyanoacrylate is because that is a component of super glue. And the cyanoacrylate in a closed chamber that's typically heated will adhere to the oils left by the latent fingerprint. And of course, in a crime laboratory, you have purchased cyanoacrylate, but instructors and science lovers at home can also use this technique and develop a latent print at home. And what we found here is that if you use a little bit of super glue that has been placed in some tin foil at the bottom of a large jar, say a mason jar, or even a large pickle jar, so eat all those pickles that you bought from Costco, clean that pickle jar out, and you can actually put things like spoons, our cutlery that we had at our crime scene, and put a few drops of that super glue onto that tin foil that's been placed at the bottom of that pickle jar. Seal the jar, and it takes longer, but you can actually see a print develop using your homemade super glue fuming chamber. So that's just another alternative that you could use for an eye cure that's very inexpensive and less equipment oriented. And lastly, I want to mention that these two methods, the powdering and the super glue or cyanoacrylate fuming, are for non-porous substances. So these are not going to be used on things like paper or magazines. So if someone had a threatening letter, you're not going to powder it, you're not going to super glue fume it. There are processes and reagents that are used for non-porous substances, and those include reagents such as ninhydrin, as well as iodine fuming. And I know iodine really isn't the greatest chemical to use, but it's also fairly inexpensive if you get it from a chemical warehouse, and as long as you handle it safely and according to protocol, you should be okay with that. The iodine fuming is typically an older method, but it can be used, and it does produce very nice fingerprints on porous material. So I've given you a lot of information, both at the crime scene and in the laboratory setting. I hope this has sparked some ideas. I hope this has given you some useful information that you can take back to your institution or to your schools, to your students, to help you develop some really cool research projects in and around forensic science. If you have any questions, I know that we've all provided our contact information within this workshop, and I do hope you will contact me with any questions. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope you've enjoyed yourselves too. So thank you again. I'm going to go back and finish processing the crime scene, and we'll see you later. Bye.